Thank you, Shane. You made a couple of points there that I'm actually going to just have a little word about. Right, I'm from Hamilton, been up here 4 years. You talked about the Waikato Expressway. On the Waikato Expressway between Auckland and Hamilton, they do not pay a toll. So the new road being built, are you going to be paying another toll? More than likely. All right? So how does that benefit Northlanders, having to pay tolls? It doesn't. All right? The regions need to be supported by a government and a level playing field. Now the other thing is, up north of the wall of timber. All right? Why aren't we like Murupara and the Eastern Bay of Plenty? In its peak, 7 trains per day to the port of Tauranga. 160 trucks and trailers off our roads. Okay? How can you do that here if you don't have a rail link? You cannot. Okay, next speaker, Dave Gordon from KiwiRail.
On Alby.
Thanks very much, Alby. It's interesting coming to a meeting like this because to some extent we've got a political agenda here. I can't talk about that. I'm not here to comment on government policies, past or present. I just want to talk to you about the facts of the railway as we see it at the moment as a business. And there's a couple of points. We are open for business, but it has to be commercial business. Secondly, you have to think of this as a network. I've heard discussions about open this section, do that section. It's an integrated transport issue, but it's also a rail network issue. You have to think about rail in Northland in the context of rail throughout New Zealand. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And finally, we talk about investment. We can invest a lot in this railway, and I'll talk to you about some of those costs. But ultimately, if the freight isn't there, then it is a wasted investment. So firstly, let's talk about us as an SOE. We are obliged to act as a commercial entity. We're also obliged to consider our social obligations. But we are in effect two businesses, as Julianne and others have said. We've got an above rail business, which is basically the trains, the ferries, and that's in competition with the trucks and other ferries and coastal shipping, and it makes a profit. It makes enough money to pay for its own capital, to replace its own capital. But it does not make enough money to pay for the network.
So what?
That's pretty common around the world. Most rail networks don't make enough money. Most rail businesses don't make enough money to pay for the network. Currently, we receive $200 million, thereabouts, per annum from the Crown, which goes solely to the network. We are under instructions to spend that efficiently, and we have to make a choice as to where that $200 million goes. I'm confronted in my job with roughly 3,500 kilometres of network, and I've got to think where that 200 million gets spent, and I get driven firstly by safety and then by commercial opportunity. The North Auckland line is safe. It's safe because we slow it down and we have speed restrictions. It's not in good condition. Anyone, even a casual observer, can tell that just by looking at it. But it is run at a level that is appropriate for a small volume of trains. It is not appropriate if there was to be a booming rail business up here. The network simply could not cope. So let's understand what fix it actually means in terms of dollars.
Subsidise it.
If someone came in and said, go and fix up the railway from Waitakere to Whangarei, please. Get it to the same condition that the railway from Hamilton to Port of Tauranga is, because it's sort of an equivalent thing. I've got 69 bridges over 2.3 kilometres. There's 95 million. I've got 284,000 sleepers. There's another 80 million. I can go through the list. But roughly $240 million if I were just to stop and bring it up to scale. That's even before I spend money on the tunnels. So Julianne made a comment, said a little bit of money goes a long way in rail. Oh, if it were true, a little bit of money does not go a long way rail. A lot of money goes a little way in rail.
Got to start somewhere.
That's the type of cost we're talking about. $240 million. If you're going to change the signalling system, probably another $150 million. If you electrify, so you talk about a sum, around about $500 million, there or thereabouts. So that's the type of number, whether...
Long term, spend a lot more on the bloody road.
I think the point I'm making is at $500 million. That is the choice of others. We don't have $500 million to spend. That has to be aimed at the people on this table. We have a certain amount of funding. That's what we can do. If I wanted to do the same job on the road and the rail north of Whangarei, it would cost me roughly about $109 million to get that back into a condition where you'd say it would be acceptable to run trains at a greater speed than they are standard thing. So you're talking monies round about $600 million. That's what the discussion is in Northland before you talk about Marsden Point. You've got the connection there to do. So within Northland, you're talking about a spend somewhere between $750 million to $1 billion on rail. That's the size of the discussion here. But the thing... How on earth...
How much?
Well, given I work for KiwiRail, I wouldn't have a damn clue. The other thing you have to think through, that has to be thought through, is it's a rail network. Rail exists beyond Northland. If Northport is going to boom and be a major export port, it's presumably going to have to get goods from south of Auckland, from the Waikatos and the Palmerston Norths and the Manawatu, areas where the current ports of Auckland currently get their product. Enormous challenge exists. There is no efficient freight rail link through the Auckland Isthmus. Our predecessors in the 1940s recognised this and purchased land and have a corridor. We still hold that corridor. We still protect that corridor. The rail network in Auckland is getting busier and busier. You would probably have to triple track the 9 from Newmarket or Avondale through outside the Auckland Isthmus area. There's another $2 to $3 billion. That is the scale of the investment required if Northport is to become the equivalent of, say, a Port of Tauranga. So just going back on the numbers, I'm not making a judgment as to whether it's worth spending or not. But roughly $700 to $1 billion to get Northland Rail network in a position where it operates roughly the same as what its competitors in Bay of Plenty or Tauranga. That's the problem you've got in front of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Dave. Appreciate your honesty. Don't share your vision. Okay, we travel to Auckland. We know what it's like when you get to Orewa. You're stuck for 3/4 of an hour. You get to the Harbour Bridge. You get through Spaghetti Junction. You might have another traffic jam in Ellerslie. All right. While we're campaigning, folks, down there at the Growers Market over the last 3 weeks, we've had foreigners coming up, French, Dutch, going, it's crazy we don't have a passenger service from Auckland to Whangarei. Absolutely insanity. So the short vision, we don't share that, and it's a funding issue, and we'll be rolling this Grow Northland Rail Express into Auckland, and we'll be hosting a Meet the Merrill Kennedys forum, where we'll be pinning them down about getting rid of those cars on the port, getting them up to Northport, putting them on rail and carting them out of there, the logs up from north as well, and we'll get a passenger service. You've got to start somewhere. We've had a guts full. We're thinking of our future, our kids. We know oil's disappearing, so we're going to make a move on that. So the locomotive is moving down there. So let's move into our critiques. We'll start with just use the 1 minute, please. Alan?
I think we're allowing the conversation to be focused on the economic case for or against in KiwiRail. They're just showing what a limited budget that they are subjected to. We really need to look at the big picture that our government really should be responding with some leadership towards. I'm talking here about big picture issues like climate change, the resilience against the fluctuations in the price of oil that we were warned against by the International Energy Agency some 5 years ago. Oil is very cheap now, but it was up $178 a barrel, now down to 40 or something. But it's going to go back up again. Our rail is a strategic asset and it needs to be treated as such and not as a little business that can be run around and used for political ends. And I think...
Okay, can we move on to you, Wayne? We drill down into the National Party representative and what he had to say.
Well, actually, I'm buggered how I understand anyone in Northland votes National. We're spending $2 billion on the roads in Northland. Well, actually, $1 billion of that's on 18 kilometres, and it's actually the best piece of road between here and Auckland anyway. And the other interesting thing that I've learned tonight is it's actually all the customers' fault that the rail is being downgraded and run into the ground in Northland. It's all the customers' fault. It's got nothing to do with National, it's got nothing to do with transport planning, it's got absolutely nothing else except it's all the customers' fault.
Thanks, Wayne. On to you, Chris.
Well, I take issue with Shane's view that there isn't freight available in commercial quantities. I've read over 20 expensively commissioned reports into rail in Northland, along with surveys of major businesses, and by far the majority of them are saying that if there was a decent rail service there for their product, they would make use of it. In many cases, they think it would be cheaper than putting it onto the roads in the first place. And we've just had announced this glossy Taituka Northland Regional Development Plan.
Oh, is that the one that doesn't include rail?
Well, no, it does include rail. It's got the word rail in it twice. The only problem is it's got a T in front of it, so it's two words that say trial. And it's nothing to do with rail at all. Dave, I understand the problem that KiwiRail have got with funding. But I want everybody to think about this. Currently, the government spends $12 million per day, every day, 365 days of the year, on interest on money that it's borrowed from overseas and local banks. And it has the capacity to have had that funding from our own reserve bank, just as the government after the Depression did, that built thousands of houses in New Zealand with money from the Reserve Bank at 1% interest. It's about time we started to apply some of those common sense answers to our rail problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Okay, Kelvin, we're ready for the next thing, please. Appreciate you coming on, Kelvin.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Fred, mihi kauna ki a koe mō ngā kupu karakia te pōnei. Tēnā rā koe. Folks, I come from a family. My grandfather was a railwayman. My two uncles were. My father, even when he left school before he went to the freezing works, worked on the railway. So I've got a soft spot for rail in New Zealand. Well, I also live in Kaitaia, so Saturday I drove from Kaitaia to Auckland. Sunday I drove from Auckland to Kaitaia. Tonight I'll drive back down to Auckland. And let me tell you, if I hit a good run, it can take me 4 hours to get from Kaitaia to the Harbour Bridge. If I hit a bad run where there's trucks and so on and so forth on the road, it could take me 4.5 to 5 hours to get there. In fact, I wish I could show you the photo on my phone. I was so peed off the other day. Driving along, there was 2 cars in front of me, then there was 2 refrigerated trucks, there was another car, and then there were 3 logging trucks in a row in front of me. It took me probably 15 kilometres to get past all of them, and then got a good stretch for about 2 minutes before I hit 2 milk tankers. Those of you who live here will know the story. If it's not me, it'll be all of you will have experienced it in some way, shape or form, and it's very, very frustrating. It would be a lot easier if a lot of those trucks were off the roads and we were transporting our our goods by rail. Now, if 1.8% of goods are transported by rail, there's a lot of room to improve that, isn't there? But if we continue to talk down rail, which is the way I've heard it for the last, I don't know, forever, we talk it down, then nobody's going to have the business confidence to actually put their goods on rail. Now, KiwiRail, I hear that they've got $200 million to spend on maintaining the lines, and I do have some sympathy for them because the dollar can only stretch so far. But as Dover's called out, $26 million on a flag. Someone else called out how much do they spend on the roads, and of course when I first got into Parliament there was $1.4 billion spent on bailing out South Canterbury Finance. So if your priorities are there is money to actually do these things. It just depends on the priorities. Now, KiwiRail, my question is, have they actually gone out and touted for business? Because as Chris said, 20 reports saying there's 20 odd businesses that would put their stock on trains if they could. But of course, you know, like I say, the way we talk down rail, and rail has been talked down for so long, businesses won't really have the confidence of putting it on there, and you know, because they need good solid information in order to make their business decisions. The rail link out to Northport is essential if rail is to be successful. I believe that the Regional Council has bought most of the corridor to go out there. You know, that would be something that over the next 15 to 20 years would grow and grow and grow and grow. Actually, Wayne, I don't want to steal any of Wayne Brown's thunder, but you know, he's a businessman who's developing stuff in the north. He would put his stuff on. Well, he was telling me the other day he would put his stuff on the tracks if it was there. Look, the maintenance of the bridges and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I understand that, but I'm told that trucks, a heavy laden truck, causes the same amount of damage to the road that 1,000 cars do. Now, do the trucks actually pay $1,000 times more in road user charges? Basically, the transport industry, the trucks in that are being subsidised, and you know, they're on the pig's back. Let's be frank, they are being subsidised. They've got it easy. Whereas poor KiwiRail has to maintain the railway lines, they have to maintain the bridges, they have to maintain the infrastructure, as well as buy their engines, buy their carriages, and all that sort of stuff. I don't think it's a level playing field. And how can rail possibly compete with road when it isn't a level playing field? We look at all the money that's been spent on the Brynduans. I believe that they're straightening the wrong side of the Brynduans, personally. In fact, I asked somebody who was involved, you know, it was at NZTA. I said to them, why are you actually straightening the straight side of the Brynduans and the curvy side is being left alone? He said, well, actually there's fewer accidents on the southern side because of the curves and the narrowness. Cars actually go slower, so they don't have so many accidents. I said, well, based on that rationale, let's just narrow all our roads and put in more corners. But every time I drive, or any time any of us drive the roads of Northland, we do take our lives into our own hands. We do have to be really careful. You know, the overtaking of those 5 trucks the other day, you know, it's not easy. We don't have the passing lanes, and we don't have the straights that they do in other parts of the country. I think the clay is called Onarahi Chaos, the clay, and it's not good for road foundations. So, you know, our roads are shocking. There's potholes everywhere. You know, I have to drive the Mangamuka Gorge while they'll reseal the Mangamuka Gorge, and about 6 months later it's slumped again. And that's quite common throughout Northland. So it just makes sense to take the heavy stuff, as much of the heavy stuff off the roads as we can. We know that they're trying to put on longer, taller, heavier trucks. It just doesn't make sense in Northland. It absolutely doesn't. Our lives are going to be jeopardised. The roads are going to be worse. It just doesn't make sense. The Labour Party actually is calling for an integrated transport system, road, rail and coastal shipping. We can't put all our eggs in one basket, and we seem to be putting our eggs all on the roading side of things. We need to have coastal shipping, we need to have rail, not just for our economic growth, but just for our safety of ourselves, our friends and our families. And if we're talking about safety, I think, we need to investigate in that integrated transport system. Kia ora.
Remember a few years ago when we had the bad flooding up north, we had a section of the State Highway 1 washed out. Yeah. Okay, you divert off any road up here, you're on a go track. All right? The Dusty Roads group, you've had a guts full of it. All right? And something that I remember during the last election, I went to the National Party's economic vision, and after John Key took the stand, the most popular applause when someone said, never mind Jerry Brownlee waiting to rev up his bulldozers to start the holiday highway, what about our broken roads in Northland? That's what happened there. So it's just amazing that we have this sort of narrow-minded vision. The landscape here doesn't suit heavy trucks. When that rain was happening, we were having potholes. Cars were getting blown. Passenger vehicles were having blowouts along the Ruakaka Strait. Okay, that's the problem that we have. Okay, so our next speaker is a Northland businessman, familiar to a lot of you. I don't know Wayne Brown myself, but I've heard a lot about him, and it's all positive when it comes to rail. Please take the stand, Wayne Brown.
Right, I'll get things clear from the start. I'm not here as a politician, and I'm not really even a railway enthusiast particularly. I didn't have toy trains. I'm just a businessman with a track record of investment in the far north. And, well, it's a good track record. It's interesting to hear people so keen on economic development in Northland and investment. Perhaps if you listen there, you'll know how it happens. My current project is, which we hope to have operating in spring next year, I'm sure we will, we'll start later this year, is Northland Milk will be starting a new factory in KiwiRail, and in spring next year we'll be sending 12 containers a day out of KiwiRail onto the system. It's a $100 million a year business. It's what I consider to be a really worthwhile, decent size investment. It's not sufficient to get you invited to an economic development conference, but I think it's quite big. In order to get this going, I've had to persuade a lot of people to do what I want them to do. I've got to persuade suppliers to supply me. That's got a lot easier. I've got to persuade buyers offshore to buy what we're producing, and we're pretty well there on that one. I've got to persuade funders, and that's pretty well there. I had to get a resource consents. I got one from NRC, which wasn't too difficult. I got one from FNDSO, which was bloody awful. It was a mixture of intransigent, not wanting to pass anything positive, plus, to be fair to them, mixed up with HAIL, which was an appalling piece of anti-business legislation passed by the National Party of the Hazardous Activities Industries list. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but I had to test all this ground for chemicals, and bearing in mind on the site I own, we just want to take off the topsoil and cover it in concrete. You wouldn't have thought it mattered what was underneath there, but we found 72 parts per million of arsenic. And everyone thinks, shit, arsenic, that's terrible. But it's actually a natural element. I'm not sure if you realise that. In one of my other businesses, which is involved in hunting for gold, we've found whole farms in the Kaio area at 2,600 parts per million of arsenic, and the cows are quite happily munching on the grass, and Fonterra's quite happily exporting this, but I'm not allowed to put concrete on the bloody ground. So if you want to do something more useful than getting rude words off a van, can you get rid of the hail legislation? Now, cost control is pretty important to me. It's my money amongst others. I've got to organise suppliers, builders, plant operators. I've got to get fuel tied up, and we've done that with On Gas. I've got to organise power from the poorly governed Top Energy. I've got to organise water from the local water company. We've done all of these things. To make this work, though, there's got to be profits. The benefits to the community and economy will flow if there's profits. That's what I'm doing it for. Costs have got to be kept down and prices have got to be kept up as much as I can, and that leads me to transport for these 12 containers a day every day of the year. Originally, as a grown-up person, I thought that would involve trucking them to the rail at Moruwa and then to Marsden Point, but it's turned out I'm wrong on both of those. This really has to change, and it's got to start right at the ports, in my view. We've got 3 ports in New Zealand, and we've got a government which needs to govern. The ports in question are Marsden Point, which is close, is deep. It's even more poorly managed and governed than any of the rest of them. It doesn't have a crane for containers, and you can't get there by rail. Then you go to Auckland, which is where the highest value land in New Zealand is covered by one layer of Japanese used cars. That just doesn't make sense to me, because Marsden Point's got actually free land there, so that should be shifted up. Tauranga is well governed and well organised, and that's where my stuff has to get to. So at present, it's probably going to go trucked not to Moruwa, but the whole way to Auckland. And in fact, in a lot of ways, I can't see why it just can't be plonked on a railway and go from Moruwa to Tauranga, or for better still, Moruwa to Marsden Point. There's talk about economics, and a lot of people talk about economics without their own money involved. It costs $700 only to get a container from Tauranga to China. The best quote I've had from getting the container from Kirikiri to Auckland is about twice that, and it still hasn't got to Tauranga. So we need some real thinking about this. The government earlier this year announced $4 million investment in infrastructure, and I thought, well, that'll be the container loader at Moruwa. But it turned out to be an art gallery. Now, if that's infrastructure, I'm lost the plot, mate. And there is enough money, and I do look at the Brynderwins, which is actual fact Purla, and I know a bit about that because my mum was born on the Brynderwins, and it is definitely the wrong side. We're spending, looks to me like about $50 million to take a perfectly good 100k road up the hill and turn it into an 80k road. Now, if that's an improvement, I'm buggered if I know. And on the other side, the same corner, and I'm not a big fan of the safety drives things. I think economics and common sense and availability of the roads should drive things rather than the mad way they spend on safety. But if you were worried about safety, in 1953 there was a very bad accident on that hill, and that corner is exactly the same as it was then. And it's just got a better surface, and it goes round that corner and it lands in my uncle's farm, just like it always did. So there you go. Someone's turned it off, but so that's my view. See.